Hey everybody, this is Wayne and I'm back again with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the SJY Audio Zeph. So if you haven't heard an SJY Audio headphone before, they're very good. It's a small boutique, one-man shop. Jeffrey of SJY Audio, he kind of has been doing these headphones for a few years now. He's gone through a few iterations. I've listened to the Umi, I've listened to the Horizon Closed, and the Zeph is the most recent flagship that he's released. As a quick spoiler alert, this was given to me as a review unit and I'm going to be touring this with a few other people. So, you know, this is something that I did receive in exchange for a review, but, you know, I've always had very good feelings about SJY Audio. I've reviewed a few other headphones before that were purchased on my own dollar, and I've always had good experience with working with them. Overall, I would say if you're a fan of like the Harman style tuning with a little bit variations and you are a huge planar magnetic headphone fan, then the SJY Audio kind of hits in a really good spot for just the overall price to performance. And, you know, I listened to the Umi a long time ago and I thought that was a very good kind of neutral, balanced type of headphone. The Horizons had a little bit more bass, and the Zeph in this case is a new flagship tuning, still based on the Harman, but he does a really good variation and it hits a lot of the marks. But let's do a quick B-roll. It's going to be a little bit different since it's a headphone, but, you know, kind of going off the drop near video, but let's get to it. So the SJY Audio Zeph retails for about $1,199. And on sale right now through the website is $999 if you go direct to sjyaudio.com. It is a planar magnetic driver headphone. It's on the thinner side, kind of reminds me of the Moondrop Cosmos, where the driver assembly in this case is 4 millimeters thick. The chassis is 7 millimeters, and it's overall very thin. But that being said, this is built like a tank. So it weighs about 1.25 pounds, 569 grams with the cable plugged in. And, you know, it is on the thicker side, but I think it makes it kind of feel more solid. I think again, the build quality in this case is probably the best Jeffrey's done so far. The driver is a proprietary 96 by 73 millimeter planar driver. The impedance is 22 ohms and the sensitivity is 89 decibels per milliwatt. Overall, I mean, it's still on the harder to drive side, but it's not as bad as previous iterations that he's done. And it comes with a dual 3.5 to 4 millimeter balanced headphone cable and a actually kind of nice carriage case. And there is magnetic pads in this case, and I'll talk more about it in the actual sound section and the unboxing section a little bit. But yeah, overall, I think this is probably the best build quality that Jeffrey's had in these headphones. I think overall it's very solid, it's built like a tank, honestly. Like, you know, it's very solid metal. It is on the heavier side that you'd expect from such a thin diaphragm, but I think it works really well in this case. I think the clamp force is a bit on the tighter side, but it helps make it feel more solid and kind of helps with keeping the seal, so that way when you're listening, it, you know, stays on top of your head and you don't feel like you're missing out on anything. Overall, I think the Zeph is a very good headphone. I would highly recommend checking it out and any of the can jams, and this is just coming out. So, you know, without further ado, let's get into the unboxing section, and then I'll talk about the sound and what you can expect. Okay, so this is the unboxing experience for the SJY Audio Zeph. So the carrying case wasn't an original thing. It is something that Jeffrey did eventually get tacked on. So some people that have the Zeph may not have this, but this review copy does have the carrying case. It's pretty nice. Has a embossed, and then when you open it, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Sony MDR Z1R with the kind of foam protection carrying it. Comes with the standard SJY Audio kind of cloth fabric cable, which is a dual 3.5 to 4.4 in this case. I mean, honestly, I think the cable's really nice. Overall, it's kind of standard with Jeffrey's headphones. And folds pretty well. I mean, you know, against this very nice soft fabric cable. So, folds pretty well overall. No real issues or concerns, nothing too special about it. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 with a little chin slider there. So, the Zeph itself. This is the Zeph, and you can kind of see it's a very thin chassis. The headband is kind of very heavy duty. That's where the steel kind of comes in, and sliding mechanism goes up pretty well. It's built like a tank and very just kind of a boxy uniform like look to it. I don't really have any issues with it, honestly. I think the build quality is great. It is a bit tight, and with the being in the carrying case, it's going to be a little bit tighter. But overall, I don't really have any issues with it. It doesn't do the free swivel anymore, so it locks here. You can kind of pivot it a little bit, but it's no more free swivel like the Horizon or anything like that. Let's go ahead and push that back through. The connections that you're going to be plugging through is no longer just pointed down. It is at an angle, so you can kind of see. Let me show real quick that you'll plug it in. It snaps in, and then when you put on the headphones itself, it'll be kind of going forward, and that's where your forward facing is. So what's nice about the Zeph, besides a really thin, really heavy duty but thin build quality, that kind of reminds me of the Moondrop Cosmos, is that the pads are removable, and there is actually a tuning difference to it. So the perforated side forward is kind of the interior. It's kind of harder to see here in the video, but there is a variation of tuning depending on how you do it. And then with the pad off, you can kind of see the drivers right there, and there's 2 little spokes for the magnets. And so essentially, if you want a pad roll to change the sound just a little bit, you essentially want to line up the holes, and then boom, it's connected. Take it off pretty easily, and then you just rotate it the other way, align it, and done. So I actually would say it's pretty simple, pretty easy to and straightforward to change the orientation of the pads to get a slightly different sounding tuning to it. Yeah, there it is. That's the SJY Audio Zeph. So how does Zeph sound? In one word, which I've used plenty of times before to kind of describe SJY Audio headphones, is balanced. And I would say less inclined on the bass and more of that mid-range forward, kind of really good with instruments as well as good treble energy in this case. That's going to be more emphasized. But to get into it, the bass is not missing in this case. I think the bass does take a small step back against the mid-range, but the mid-bass like slam is still there. The sub-bass details and texture are very good, so you get a lot of depth. If you're listening to a lot of hip hop, like Kendrick Lamar or The Weeknd, you still get really good sub-bass, really good bass notes. It's just not gonna necessarily rattle your head. But the caveat is that if you do increase the volume or you do EQ it, it responds really well, like the Odyssey line, like the LCD, where you just add a little bit of a bass shelf there, and it responds really well and beautifully and hits harder, sounds deeper. It's very capable overall. The mid-range is kind of where I think it shines in this case a bit more than like other previous iterations like Horizon or Horizon Closed. The mid-range details is fantastic. So I was listening to a lot of like orchestra music like Hans Zimmer, and then listening to a lot of stuff with female vocals and male vocals. Female vocals especially, I think, are emphasized a bit sweeter in this case, like Florence and the Machine, Dog Days Are Over, or I really love this test track from Ratatouille soundtrack, La Festin, and I just think the female vocals in that case are just so sparkly and pleasant to listen to in French. But female vocals shine very well and have good air, good quality without being harsh or sibilant or anything like that. And I think the mid-range, like the details of like string instruments, like any Hans Zimmer track or orchestra tracks in general, they shine very well. There's good detail and good clarity overall, and that's kind of where it stands, is like the clarity and the detail just shine through really well. It can be, depending on the orientation of the ear pads, which I'll get into in a second, a bit more forward, just depending on how you orient it. But overall, I think the tuning in this case is mid-range as the king in this case. The treble is still pleasant, and I think it's not harsh. There's good soundstage clarity, good technical performance. The soundstage is actually on the wider side, especially, you know, considering it's open back and considering how thin the diaphragm is. I think it's because your ears are so much closer to the actual driver itself in this case that it just sounds more detailed and more open sounding in this case. The overall technical performance shines very well. The soundstage is great. The details that you can pick out in like cymbal crashes and just overall instruments and what you're listening to for air, it works really well in this case. I think the treble is pleasantly tuned. Never harsh, but still present and still, you know, forward in a way that provides very good balance overall. The pads are kind of what's interesting, is if you have the orientation of the perforated side forward, then you get more soundstage and a little bit bassier notes in my opinion. And Jeffrey actually said that the non-perforated side forward actually makes the music sound more warmer, but what I think it does is it pushes the mid-range a bit more forward. And so if you're listening for vocals, that's where you're gonna wanna orient the pad itself, have it non-perforated side forward. And that way it kind of envelops more in your head when you're listening to music and you're trying to get more of that mid-range tonal balance. But overall, I think the Zeph sounds very good, very balanced, very fun. And if that's what you're looking for, then this is kind of gonna be a gold standard in the kind of flagship price range. So how does the Zeph compare to other headphones in the price point and category? So I'm gonna compare it mostly with other planar magnetic driver headphones, because dynamic drivers at this price point are gonna be more emphasized on something else or something that they're trying to do differently. I think the Zeph competes very well. I've listened to the Dan Clarks, the Audios, the ZMF, like Ori 3.0. And what I actually would say is the Zeph competes very well with all of them without needing to be touched with any EQ or any type of like alteration to the sound. So where the Audios line, typically you're gonna wanna add a bass shelf, or you're gonna wanna tame the treble a little bit more. The Ori 3.0, I think actually came off as a very good bassy headphone, which I really enjoyed, but I do think that the treble was a bit more on the harsher side, and you gotta kind of fine tune how you wanna listen to the Ori 3.0 with kind of the port and also the pads that you can roll with it. And the Dan Clarks, I've always enjoyed Dan Clark, like the headphones, like the Noir. I had the Noir. I've listened to the Noir X extensively, and I think they are very good headphones, but they just have like a almost lifeless quality to it. It's kind of dry at times. And so where I think the Zeph really stands out is that it responds very well to EQ like the Audios lineup does. You don't have to fine tune it like the Ori, and overall, if you're looking for like a very good balanced headphone, this is kind of where it is. And it actually has a little bit more of that mid-range warmthness, fullness of the music in the mid-range. And so that way it's not boring, and it doesn't necessarily come off as like, you know, too lifeless in this case, where the Dan Clarks can technically do that to me. It just sounds kind of boring. The Zeph competes very well, and I would highly recommend, you know, doing a shootout if you have an opportunity to at a Can Jam, something like that, to kind of figure out if that is something that you're in the market for. So, other things to note. The Zeph does like power, and it responds really well to whatever source you throw at it. I did have my little robot tube amp, and it did okay, but I don't feel like I unlocked it quite as well as a solid state does, in my opinion. The JDS Element 4 worked really well. I was able to drive it before hitting high gain. I have a Vioelectric V222, and I ran it off the Lay View deck, and it responds really well to whatever sources you throw. So if you have a warmer source, that's gonna bring out that characteristic of being on the warmer side. So it kind of changes the colors, the balance tuning that it has in this case. I would also say in most cases with the Zeph, I think higher volume listening works really well. It begs for more power, it begs for more volume. And if you can give it that, you can give it more power, give it more volume, then it's gonna respond really well. You can EQ it, you can tailor it to how you want to listen to it. And as is, you can just raise the volume and it's gonna sound very good with excellent bass quality, really good mid-range, and really good treble energy. The only thing I would say that is a kind of a nitpick is that the headphones don't fold flat in this case. They kind of are stationary, you can swivel it a little bit. But you know, the horizon was free falling in this case where it just swiveled endlessly, and Jeffrey kind of took that to heart that not everybody wanted that. There could be kind of over middle ground, but as far as this iteration goes, it's a really good step up to kind of addressing that concern about free swiveling. And I think the build quality is the best he's done so far in any headphone that I've listened to from him. Yeah, overall, very straightforward, extra power, works for any library because it is very good balanced tuning, and yeah. So, in conclusion, the Zeph is a very good headphone in that kilobuck range, since it is technically retailing for about $999 at this time. And if you are in the market for a premium flagship performing headphone, the Zeph is an excellent choice. It's a bit on the heavier side considering how thin everything is, but it's because it's solid steel. The build quality is insane in this case. You can kind of change the tuning a little bit in the mid-range by swapping the pads and just changing it out, and it's magnetic, so you don't have to worry about, you know, fiddling around with it at all. And if you are in the market for something that sounds very good balanced and, you know, has excellent mid-range quality as kind of the king in this case, the Zeph is a very good headphone. Overall, you know, I've always been very impressed by supporting SJY Audio and this, you know, indie shop, this one-man shop in this case. And so overall, I would actually give the Zeph a 5 out of 5 as far as a balanced tuning goes. If it was to my own personal taste, I would always love more bass, and I would probably say I could use more, but I also highly believe in variety being the spice of life. And so while I may not listen to the Zeph all the time, and I'll probably listen to the Draupnir like 95% of the time, I enjoy having something that sounds this good on the mid-range and this good as far as a tonal balance goes. And the Zeph performs at a very good level to being something that I could use, or most people could use, as an everyday headphone and have nothing missing. Overall, I think the Zeph does a really good job, and I would, again, highly recommend going to a convention and checking it out. And you'll never know what else Jeffrey has out there that he's working on, because he's a madman, and he has an E-Stat he's working on, and he has another dynamic driver headphone I think he's working on, the orthodynamic, and I'm trying to get him to do a bass head thing. So if you see him at a convention, tell him Wayne says, give me the bass head stuff, because I think he could do a really good bass head headphone and, you know, do something different enough to the point where everybody's gonna be excited. So yeah, one more time, 5 out of 5, easy 5 out of 5, because it's just really good resolution, really good soundstage, and a very good balanced headphone sound. Again, this is Make It Wayne, and until next time, bye guys.